The day has finally come when we get our first look at Project Black Flag. Earlier today, Kobold Press released the first playtest packet in this project, and I'm super excited to dig into it and share my initial thoughts on what they've done so far. So let's not waste any time, let's jump right into the playtest packet. I'm not going to go through this line by line, but I do want to point out some things here and there that I picked out as interesting tidbits. A lot of this is pretty standard fare of what you would find at the beginning of a role-playing game in general, and especially one that focuses on the 5th edition rules that we've all come to know. We do start out with a how to use this packet section, which will be absent from the final printing of the book because final printing won't be a playtest. But we do get a confirmation here. We got it in announcements already, but we get a further confirmation here that this will be backwards compatible with 5e products. We also get this cool little note about the Labyrinth, which I think is an interesting way to set up their system and their world. We don't get a lot on the Labyrinth at this point, but we do get that it's kind of this multiversal connection between lots of different settings, which is cool because they get to use their product, their RPG, to push their own individual setting, Midgard. But they also make it really clear that there are lots of other homebrew worlds and settings that exist within this multiverse. Next, we get into some really core, basic questions about what a role-playing game is. While these questions aren't super necessary for those of us who are interested enough already in RPGs to be playtesting one that hasn't even come out yet, but for the final printing of this, for someone who might be picking up an RPG for the first time, these are important questions to answer on the front end and have included in the product. That said, I am going to skip over all this part about like what is role-playing and what are these funny looking dice. But I do want to point out it does state that this is a full role-playing game. I've seen some other YouTubers and people commenting saying that this might just be a supplement, might just be an addition to the 5.1 SRD that makes it compatible with all the Kobold Press products moving forward. But this is confirmation that Project Black Flag will be its own independent role-playing game. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of what we're really interested in here. Character creation. We get everything in this playtest packet up to the point where you actually choose your class. So we've got ability scores, lineage and heritage, as well as background. And we get a little sneak peek at these things called talents. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, so let's start with ability scores. The good news right off the bat is that everything here looks very familiar. They're not making any big changes to ability scores. They are so core and central to the way 5e works that I think it would be difficult to make a big change here and for it to truly be backwards compatible. There are a few differences here though. For example, the point buy method allows you to select scores all the way up to 18, and our standard array is a little more buff than what we're used to with core D&D. Instead of the old tried and true 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, 8, we instead have 16, 15, 13, 10, and 8. Wait, I missed one. 16, 15, 13, 12, 10, and 8. That should be right. Anyway, some minor tweaks, but nothing inherently super different. You could argue that being able to start with much higher stats with point buy is very different from what we're used to in old 5e, but I think that's actually going to be balanced out a little bit in the way that they handle stat bonuses later on in the character creation process. So next we get to choose your lineage and heritage. Now this is a pretty common way in modern game design that is breaking apart the old traditional stereotypical concept of race in fantasy RPGs and breaking it apart into two sections. One that has to do with the biological parts of who you are, and the other having to do with the culture you were raised in. I know there are some people out there who have some really big feelings about keeping the word race in the game, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't actually think it matters that much. And I believe that whenever things like this come up and we have the choice to either plow forward with something that has hurt some people or choose a kinder option, a more respectful option, I tend to go with the latter. And I'm sure there will be some people who want to express those really big feelings in the comment section. Let's just make sure we keep it civil. That's kind of the whole point, and that way I don't have to block anybody. Now we won't actually get into the specific lineages and heritages until later in this overview, but we will get there, so bear with me. The next step in the character creation process, of course, is backgrounds, and backgrounds we will look at in more detail later as well. Those remain pretty similar to core D&D backgrounds, except that each background gets one of these newfangled talents, which we will also cover in more detail later. We end this section with a final checklist of things that you need to make sure that you have covered before you complete character creation, and I like how this breaks it down for new players. I almost skipped over this and said that there wasn't anything new here, except I happened to notice this little line, number 5, which says your luck points are set to 0. Now, I don't see anything else in this document that refers to luck points, so I'm guessing that's a system that we're going to have to learn more about in a future playtest packet, but it sounds pretty cool, and I hope it's not quite as broken as every character getting the lucky feat. Probably not. I'm actually assuming that it's more akin to a hero point system or an inspiration system, but we'll just have to wait and see. That said, we move forward to gaining levels, which is, again, very similar to what you find in the old Player's Handbook. We've got 2 forms of advancement with XP tracking as well as milestone leveling. I actually don't love the traditional milestone leveling system. I have my own homebrew system for that, which is similar enough, but yeah, I don't have time to go through that here. At some point I'll get around to making a video about that system, and I'll put a link up to it in the thing up here. They do have a little typo in their experience chart where essentially if you get to 6,500 experience, you gain both 4th and 5th level at the same time, but I'm certain that's just a copy-paste issue, and that'll be cleaned up before this goes to final printing. Let's touch on lineages and heritages. Your lineage gets you your age, your size, and your speed, and a few other things, but mostly those 3. We only get 3 options in the playtest packet. We get dwarf, elf, and human, which is kind of okay with me because those are the big 3 fantasy lineages that we think about when we think of Tolkien or traditional D&D or what have you. I'm not going to dig into every single trait here, but I will hit some of the highlights. We do see dark vision change to night vision, which is an interesting turn of terminology. I'm not sure why that is. I think dark vision's actually kind of a fine way of describing it. Back in the old days, I used to think of infravision as everyone seeing everything in shades of red. Now with dark vision, I think of things in shades of gray, which is actually how this ability is described. Night vision makes me think people are seeing things in shades of green, but that's probably just me thinking in terms of night vision goggles instead of how night vision actually works for, I guess, things like cats. I don't know. Dwarves get resilience. Dwarves also get dwarven toughness, which I think is really cool because in 5e, dwarven toughness is traditionally tied to just hill dwarves, that extra hit point per level, and now all dwarves get that, which is, in my opinion, a step up. Then we get a couple of dwarven heritage options. We get the Fireforge and we get the Stone Heritage. Now both of these are pretty cool. Fireforge is like your craftier, smithing dwarves who are kind of associated with fire. They get a tool proficiency, they're resistant to fire damage, they get to speak the fire elemental language. It's pretty cool. They also get the Mending cantrip, which is, we haven't actually seen the details of that spell in Project Black Flag, but seems like a good fit. Then on the other hand, we get the Stone Dwarven Heritage, which is more of a soldier type dwarf. They get the extra weapon training, the extra armor training, they get a tool proficiency. The other one gets a tool proficiency. So I guess that's a bit of an overlap, even if the exact tools aren't the same. And you get that old tried and true ability to notice differences in stonework and things, which way back in the day was really helpful when you were down in a dungeon and needed to know like the slope of something as you were mapping out your own caverns. Anyway, I've been playing D&D way too long. Let's move on to elves. Elves get night vision as well. They get proficiency with perception. They get that magic resistance to certain effects. That's a traditional elven thing, and the classic trance where they get to meditate rather than sleeping. That's personally never been one of my favorite D&D elf things, but it carries through. It's cool. Then we get a couple of heritages for the elves. We've got the Cloud Heritage. I don't love the name Cloud Elves, but It's the High Elves. They've got their Touch of Magic, which is cool, the free cantrip at first level, and then they also gain some additional spells as they get higher levels as well. And to go along with that free magic, they get proficiency in their Arcana skill, which is fitting. The Grove Heritage is essentially the Wood Elves minus the bonus to their speed. Although you do gain a climbing speed, which is pretty cool even if you can't run faster than regular elves. They also get some weapon training options as well as the ability to talk to animals. Then we get to the humans, which are pretty standard. At least if you're used to the variant humans from 5e. They're pretty baseline, but they get a bonus skill proficiency as well as a bonus talent, which we'll find out in a few minutes is pretty close to a feat. Then we get a couple of heritages for humans, starting with the Nomad. They are naturally better at surviving in tough climates. They also get training in the survival skill, appropriately enough. So if your nomads are kind of like your country folk, the other heritage that we get is the city slickers, I guess. They've got street smarts, which keeps them from getting lost or surprised in a city, as long as there's not a magic reason for them to be lost. I actually don't like this one, pretty much for the same reason that I didn't like rangers automatically not being able to get lost in the wilderness in traditional 5e. It kind of takes away from some of the exploration stage. I don't know how much people do exploration in cities, but I feel like automatically not being able to get lost is just taking away a huge element of design space that you could capitalize on later, but it's just gone. And they've got worldly wisdom, which allows them to better understand other cultures and peoples, which is actually really cool because there's so many times in game that players are like, hey, do I recognize the significance of that thing that those people are doing? And it'd be really nice to have a mechanical advantage for some of the players to pick up on some of those clues. This would give them that, and I think that's pretty cool. The last part of this process that we get is the background, which is very similar to backgrounds in traditional 5e, except they've added a talent. Each background comes with a package of proficiencies and languages and some equipment that a person of that background would have. And every background allows you to choose a talent. And this is where we finally get to talk about talents, because they are interesting. Mechanically, they are almost identical to feats. They're a way to further individualize your character with additional abilities that are not tied to a class itself. But the talents are broken down into 3 types. There's magic talents, there's martial talents, and there's technical talents. Did I get that right? Yes. So we find out in this playtest packet that if this moves forward as is, you'll be able to pick up talents as A, part of your background, B, part of your lineage if you're a human, or C, as a part of your class, but when you could get an improvement. Now, I personally hope that the improvements come a little more often than they do in traditional 5e. Getting them every 4th level, in my opinion, is a little bit slow of a progression. If they do choose to keep improvements at the same levels, the 4th, 8th, 12th, and so on, I do hope that they find other ways to sneak them in mechanically, because feats are really cool, talents are really cool, and it's fun to pick them, it's fun to use them, and design builds with them, and getting to play with those toys more often, I think, is a positive thing. As it stands in 5e, fighters and rogues, to my knowledge, are the only classes that get bonus feats at levels other than 4th, 8th, 12th, so on. I really hope that Kobold Press finds a way to sneak these in other ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be every level, but being able to choose them more often than every 4 levels would be really nice. Now, I could go into a lot of detail on all of these talents, but I think I'll save that for later. I think the best way to end here is with a short overview of how I feel about this playtest packet. Is this moving in a direction with 5e that I like? In general, absolutely yes. The core of the system is close enough to 5e that this should be compatible right out of the box, or out of the book, I guess, without having to make major changes at all. Yes, you'll have to change some things at character creation, but that's like literally session 0 and nothing else. I could build a character with this character creation method and literally run it through any of the adventures on my shelf and it'd be totally fine. And that's exactly what I'm looking for in the next evolution of 5e. There are a few things that they've done here that are very similar to what Level Up Advanced 5e has done, and I'm cool with that as well. I like A5e. I'll be GMing it some over the next few weeks, which is cool. I'll put a link in the description if you want to watch that live. And I'm looking forward to playing around with these new versions of 5e that are coming out. But what do you think? Is this hitting the mark for what you expected of Project Black Flag? Better or worse than what you wanted to see? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. See you soon.